Lakuta Sikha is Chelek Chaf, the Sikha of Miketz Beis, Bila Nishmis Rav Yosef ben Yamin ben Rabbi Nasha Kaltman. We are also learning Lischus, our dear friend, Rabbi Yosef Shlema ben Risha, for our Refuah Shlema Ukreva. Today we're going to explore the idea of getting ready for Shabbos. What is the significance of getting ready for Shabbos as it relates to the mitzvah of Shabbos? And we're going to do that from within the context of the story of Yosef in Mitzrayim. Afin pasuk vayar Yosef v'gomer vayemer lasher al beisai gomer utvayach tevach v'hochin v'gomer. The pasuk says Yosef saw that the brothers came with Binyamin, so he told the person in charge of his house to go to slaughter and to prepare food. Steht in Medrash v'hochin ein v'hochin el Shabbos. Says the Medrash, the word v'hochin, which is to prepare, refers to Shabbos. As we find by the mon that the Eibishter said on the sixth day they will prepare that which they bring home. So we see the word hachana vehechinu. So that word connects to the v'hachen here, and it means also here it means they were preparing for Shabbos. Hada amra sheshamar Yosef es Shabbos koidim shaloiti nasein, and this teaches us that Yosef observed the Shabbos even before it was given. From Pastus Lashna Medrash came an Atosabin as the Mitvert gemeint Uistel and Yosef in Lagabes and the Brider, that a person can misinterpret this Medrash to say that it's intending to distinguish Yosef from his brothers. Und Shmira Shabbos legabe andere mitzvahs, and to distinguish the mitzvah of Shabbos from the other mitzvahs that are out there. Das heißt und nicht die andere Shvatim, aber geht Shabbos to imply that only Yosef observed Shabbos and not his brothers. Gehit Shabbos und nicht die andere mitzvahs, and that he observed Shabbos and not other mitzvahs. So the Medrash says that Yosef observed Shabbos means Yosef not his brothers. It means Shabbos not other mitzvahs. However, this can't be the meaning of it, because Chazal Zogin, as the Avos haben agit al mitzvah Torah. Chazal teach us that the Avos they observed all of the mitzvahs. Even though they were not commanded to do so. It says he's going to command his children and his household. So certainly Yaakov followed in the footsteps of Avram and taught his children these mitzvahs that he received from Avram. All of his sons, not just Yosef. As Rashi writes very clearly in the Gemara Masechta Chulin, that the children, the sons of Yaakov, observed the mitzvahs, that even though Torah had not yet been given, they received it from their fathers. So clearly, it can't be that just Yosef was keeping just Shabbos. We see clearly that the Avos kept all the mitzvahs, then they passed it down to Yaakov to his sons. So what does it mean that Yosef observed Shabbos? Nor der Medrash meint nicht zu schädel sein, der Kiyum von Shara Mitzvahs al der Yosef. The Medrash does not intend to negate the fulfillment of other mitzvahs by Yosef, und dem Kiyum von Mitzvahs Shabbos or Shara Mitzvahs al der Shvatim, and the fulfillment of Shabbos and all the other mitzvahs by the brothers of Yosef, nor as Yosef Shmir Shabbos wird angelernt von Pasuk. Hada Omra. The Chiddush of the Medrash is that Yosef Shmir Shabbos is unique because it's in the Torah. Whereas the other mitzvahs that Yosef fulfilled, similarly the fulfillment of all the mitzvahs by the Shvatim is not mefurish in pasuk. There's no pasuk that tells it to us clearly. Now, so Rabbi is going to say now it's more than that. It's not just that Yosef is in the pasuk and the others are not. The Rebbe is going to prove from another medrash that the fact that Yosef is in the pasuk is because his Shmira Shabbos, his observance of Shabbos, was unique. The Rinyan now, the Adgosha from their Ma'ila from Shmira Shabbos are the Yosef, and the Rebbe proves this from the following thing: that this concept that Yosef, the emphasis on the observance of Shabbos by Yosef, steht in Medrash Eich B'Makamacher, is written in another medrash. The pasuk says, "Mi hikdimani v'hashalem," who will preempt me, I will repay them. Says the Medrash, this pasuk medaber b'Yosef shehu hikdim v'shimer es Shabbos. It's referring to Yosef who preempted Hashem by observing Shabbos, actually nitna, even before it was given as a mitzvah. And the Medrash brings the same pasuk that this previous medrash brought from our parsha. Utveach tevach v'hachin. Omer Rabbi Yochanan erev Shabbos hoisa. Ve'ein v'hachin el Shabbos. It says the word v'hachin. Says Rabbi Yochanan is referring to erev Shabbos. V'hachin means preparing for Shabbos. Shenemer v'haya b'yom hashishi v'hechinu, as we learn from the pasuk by the Mon, where it says v'hechinu, the term hachana, with regard to preparing for Shabbos. However, this medrash adds something. When the medrash firtuis, this medrash concludes. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yosef, Ata Shamartes HaShabbos Achel Nitna Teira. Hashem says to Yosef, you observed the Shabbos even before it was given. Chayecha, I promise you, Shani Meshadlun LeBen Bincha, I will repay you by giving to your grandson, Sheyehi Makniv Karbani B'Shabbos, that he could offer his carbon on Shabbos, referring to the Karbanos Hanesiim that were done in the month of Nisan after the Mishkan was dedicated on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Every Shevet had a day where their Nasi brought a carbon, and Ephraim, who is the Nasi Livnei Ephraim, who is the grandson of Yosef, his day fell out on Shabbos. And there's a discussion in the Gemara, since it's a carbon yachid, it's a private carbon, can he bring it on Shabbos? Says the Medrash that even though generally speaking you cannot bring a carbon on Shabbos, here the Eibishter gave a present, a reward to Yosef that his grandson or great-grandson will be able to bring a carbon even on Shabbos. And the Rebbe is going to point out from this that we see from here that there's something unique about Yosef, that it was his descendant that got the reward. And it's something unique about Shabbos, which is why the reward was related to Shabbos. From them, medrash is mashma kehemshech la'anal. So if you're connecting the tvayach tevach v'hachin and this reward that his descendant is able to bring a carbon on Shabbos, it's understood, it's implied. Adosva says the fact that we are highlighting, the fact that we are distinguishing Yosef's Shabbos observance is nitveis and demos by imis das meferish and pasuk. It's not just because by Yosef it's written clearly in the pasuk. Nor azayin shmira Shabbos is given mit a yisrein legabe zayin kiyum von andere mitzvahs. But it must be that Yosef's observance of Shabbos was different, was greater than the other mitzvahs that he did. Similarly, it must have been different than the way the other Shvatim, his brothers, did the mitzvahs. After Shmira Shabbos, and that's why specifically Yosef's grandchild received a special reward for this Shabbos observance, and it was a Shabbos-related reward. The other Rabbi says the Rebbe, dos is their town was dafke Shmira Shabbos when Yosef is mefurish bikra, and not to say that Yosef is in the pasuk and that's how we know it's special. The opposite, because it's special, because it's unique, so much so that it deserved a special reward. This is why it's in the pasuk. Davon verstehen, but this requires us to understand, to explain, in was besteht der Ilui von Shmiras HaShabbos to Yosef, of Shmiras HaShabbos to Shara Shvatim. What is the advantage? What is the greatness of Yosef's Shabbos observance in comparison to the observance of the other Shvatim, his brothers? And this uniqueness, however we're going to explain what the uniqueness of Yosef is, where do you see it in the words to slaughter the meat, to slaughter the slaughter, and to prepare for Shabbos? In Seif Beis, the Rebbe is going to ask another question about the fact that seemingly the way we're learning that Yosef observed Shabbos is from a roundabout way. From the fact that he prepared on Shabbos, on Friday, we know that he didn't do malacha on Shabbos. And the Rebbe is going to ask, why not present it in a more straightforward manner? How do we process from the fact that v'hachin means Shabbos? How do we process that Yosef actually observed Shabbos? If you see it simply, on the surface level, since Yosef commanded that they should prepare the Shabbos foods before Shabbos, this clearly implies that on Shabbos they couldn't prepare the food, they couldn't cook it, etc. So therefore, it must be that Yosef was observing Shabbos. The Rebbe says this, however, demands an explanation. Why is this concept, this idea that Yosef is observing Shabbos, why is it being learned in such a roundabout manner, such an indirect way? Since he was preparing on Erev Shabbos for Shabbos, we must derive from there as b'Shabbos that on Shabbos he wasn't doing malacha. If the Medrash is telling us that this pasuk is coming to teach us that Yosef observed Shabbos, it should have been presented in a more direct, in a clearer manner. For example, the way the Mechilta does it, where the Mechilta is another Medrash, but it has a much more direct way of explaining Yosef's Shabbos observance. In Mechilta, we find a more direct way. Der Fund was Yosef hat Mechin given be'erev Shabbos. Lernt man up from the fact that Yosef was preparing on Erev Shabbos, we derive as Erot Mekaying when dem Anzag Zacher Asim Shabbos, that he was fulfilling the commandment, remember the day of Shabbos. Was beniden di dan behachona is the Shayach Dafke Far Shabbos in Yemeisa Chayil be'erev Shabbos. And how do you remember Shabbos when it comes to preparing for Shabbos? By doing so before Shabbos. You state in Mechilta from Pasuk Zacher v'Gemer, Learn Penaf, as Mechilta teaches us that from the Pasuk Zacher, remember the day of Shabbos. We learn you should remember Shabbos even on Sunday. That if you encounter a fine portion, you should prepare it or set it aside for Shabbos. And then during the week, if you find something better, then you could eat the first portion and then use the finer portion for Shabbos. But this way, a whole week, you're thinking and preparing for Shabbos. So therefore, when it says that Yosef was preparing on Erev Shabbos, it wasn't just because he couldn't work on Shabbos. It's because you're supposed to remember Shabbos the whole week. And Friday you're supposed to think about Shabbos and prepare for Shabbos, regardless of whether you're going to do malacha, whether it's a kind of malacha that you could do on Shabbos or not. So in the Mechilta, it seems very beautiful. Yosef was preparing for Shabbos. That means that Shabbos was important to him every day of the week. So this is Ba'if and Yashin, it's a very direct way. Versus the way the Medrash is presenting it, that he wouldn't do malacha, that we derive that he couldn't do malacha on Shabbos. So why are we presenting it in this seemingly indirect manner? Sif Gimel. So the Rebbe is going to begin the biur by first addressing the fact that the Medrash focuses and describes Yosef's Shabbos observance as kodim shaloi tinasai, before it was given. And the Rebbe is going to ask, why is that necessary? Wird man das verstehen, was der Medrash is Moshe vom Adgish as Yosef Shmini Shabbos is given kodim shaloi tinasai. So in order for us to understand in where is the uniqueness of Yosef's Shabbos observance over that of his brothers, first we have to understand what the Medrash means when it says that Yosef observed Shabbos before it was given. The kasha ubaloshna Yefei Toyar, which the question on that is, as the Yefei Toyar says, the Yefei Toyar is a commentary on Medrash Rabbah. What's it telling us? It's very obvious that when Yosef was alive, Torah wasn't given yet. Everyone knows when was Torah given? After the Yidden came out of Mitzrayim, which is way after Yosef's lifetime. Now, the Yefei Torah answered, maybe because Torah had not yet been given, it was a problem for Yosef to observe Shabbos. Because someone who is a Gentile who observes the entire Shabbos is Chayav Misa. He's not allowed to. Because already earlier in Parshas Noach, which is before Matan Torah, it says Lo Yishbeisu, referring to the seasons. It says they should, and the constellations and the sun and the moon, that they should never rest. So from this we learn that a Ben Noach, a Gentile, is not allowed to rest on Shabbos. Meaning to say, not allowed to observe the entire Shabbos. So you would think that maybe Yosef, being before Matan Torah, could not observe Shabbos. And therefore there's a chiddush that despite the fact that the Torah had not yet been given, nevertheless Yosef observed Shabbos. And there's a discussion over there if possibly the children of the Avish were not considered Bnei Noach, even though it was before Matan Torah. But this is how the Yefei Torah answers the question. The Chiddush is that despite the fact that Benoach Shabbos Chayev Misa, Yosef was allowed to keep Shabbos, and Yosef did keep Shabbos. Aber the Fee said, "Der sein die Adgosha nit of them was mitzvah Shabbos is noch dem nit gegeben geworden." But if that's the case, if the Chiddush of this medrash is that Yosef was able to observe Shabbos despite the fact that it was that a Benoach Shabbos is Chayev Misa, then the emphasis of the medrash is wrong, because the emphasis is not about when the Torah, that this is before the Matan Torah. None of them was he's gegeben geworden später zu Eden Davke. The Chiddush would be that despite that the Torah belongs to the Jewish people, Shabbos belongs to the Jewish people, and Yosef, in a sense, wasn't part of that because it's before Matan Torah. Therefore, it's a Chiddush that he kept Shabbos. Warum der Inyan is Benoach Shabbos Chayev Misa is doch nicht nach Matan Torah. Der ich achrisch nicht nach Matan Torah. The idea that a Benoach is not allowed to keep Shabbos doesn't matter if it's before Matan Torah or after Matan Torah. In both cases, he's not allowed to. So the Chiddush isn't that he was a Ben Noach. The Chiddush isn't that it was before Matan Torah, because even after Matan Torah he wouldn't either be able to keep Shabbos. The Chiddush is that it belongs to Klal Yisrael. So the lashon of the medrash, if the chiddush of the medrash is that Yosef observed the Shabbos even though Shabbos belongs to Yidden, then it should have said that Yosef kept Shabbos even though Shabbos was given to the Jewish people. But by focusing on the Fnei Matan Torah or La'achar Matan Torah, it doesn't seem to have an effect on the concept of a Ben Noach, which is applicable either way. So the Rebbe with this refutes the answer of the Yefei Torah and brings us back to our original question. Why does the Medrash emphasize the fact that Yosef observed Shabbos before the Torah was given? And here the Rebbe begins the beer. First of all, we're going to explain this concept of Kaidem Shaloiti Nasin. And what is in general the idea of Nesina, of giving something? Nesina is Shayach to Zagin and the Gegeben Ezach is Dabba Metzius. You can only say he gave something if this thing exists. Die Nesina tut bloß auf, als die Sache wird herausgenommen von einem Makom oder Schuss und geht über den zweiten Makom oder Schuss. If the thing doesn't exist, then you can't give it. So giving implies that something already exists, and giving it means that you're transferring it from one ownership to another ownership, from one person's domain to another person's domain. So that's the Vart of Nesina. The Vart of Nesina is that it actually has to exist. By Shabbos. And since we're emphasizing with regards to Shabbos, koydem shaleiti nasein or at nitna, that it had not yet been given, is move on as Shabbos is da von frier und sie wird gegeben. That Shabbos already exists, and the discussion about it had been given and hadn't been given is that Shabbos is being given because Shabbos already exists. In Sif Dal, the Rebbe is going to elaborate on this, but this is the foundation of our answer. To understand Yosef's the uniqueness of Yosef's Shabbos observance, the first thing we have to do is realize that Shabbos didn't begin later on. The idea of Shabbos begins before the time of Yosef. When we're discussing Ad Shalei Nitna, means that already in the time of Yosef, though it wasn't given yet, but it did exist in this world. The Asbara Bazan, let's explain this. For the time of Mitzvah Shabbos, Sechida Shabbos, Shmida Shabbos, V'chulu, Sheit B'Torah, among the reasons for why we observe Shabbos, to remember Shabbos and to observe Shabbos, the Torah says, Ki Sheishes Yom Asa Hashem Es Hashemayim V'Sa'aretz, the Eibishter created the world in 6 days, V'yanach V'yem HaShvi, or V'yem HaShvi, Shabbos V'yinafash, the Eibishter rested on the 7th day. That is how Shabbos becomes Shabbos. Because the Eibishter rested on the 7th day. Der Fun is move on. From this it's clearly understood as Gleich B'Sheishes Me'Bereishis. Immediately, in the 6 days of creation, Shabbos already is a day that is unique, it is distinguished from the other days of the week. As the Torah specifies in the very beginning of creation, the Eibishter rested on the 7th day. Hashem benched, he blessed the 7th day, and he sanctified it, because that's the day that he rested from his work. So Shabbos, when does Shabbos happen? When does Shabbos become different than the rest of the week? The very, very first Shabbos of creation. Then there's another part of Shabbos being commanded to the Jewish people. That happens after the Yidden go out of Mitzrayim. By Matan Torah, by Matan Torah is the main event in Yeseres Hadibros, but even before that, in Mora, when the Eibishter commands the Yidden to keep Shabbos, la'achre Yetzias Mitzrayim, but the emphasis here is that it had to be after Yetzias Mitzrayim. The Rambam is Mavar in Mir Nevuchim, as the Rambam explains in Mir Nevuchim, as the tzvei time b'mitzvah Shabbos, that there's two reasons that we find with regards to Shabbos. In the first Aseres Hadibros in Parshas Yisrael, the Eibishter gives the reason for Shabbos because he created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. When the Aseres Hadibros is repeated, over there, the Torah says, you should remember that you were a slave in Mitzrayim, and that's why Hashem is giving you the mitzvah of Shabbos. So the Rebbe Nevuchim addresses the fact that this seems to be contradictory. Is Shabbos a remembrance of going out of a remembrance of the Eibusher creating the world, or is Shabbos a remembrance of going out of Mitzrayim? And the Rambam of the Mir Nevuchim says, because they are for two different outcomes. There are two reasons that lead to two different outcomes. That which it says in the first Aseres Hadibros that the Eibishter rested on the seventh day, that is for the glory of the day itself. Shabbos is a special day because it's a day that Hashem rests. Omnam titei lanu teres haShabbos. The fact that He gave Shabbos to us, and the fact that He commanded us to observe Shabbos, that's the outcome of us being slaves in Mitzrayim. The fact that Shabbos exists as a holy day, that's because Hashem rested on the seventh day. But the fact that Shabbos belongs to the Jewish people, even though all of them are part of creation, is because we were slaves in Mitzrayim. We could not serve at our own will. When we wanted. And we couldn't rest. So now the Eibishter gives us a mitzvah of Shabbos to show that we can rest, that we are our own bosses, and we could take a day off, the day of Shabbos. So there's two parts to Shabbos. There's the essential holiness of Shabbos, that is a remembrance of the fact that Hashem rests on the seventh day. And then there's the fact that Shabbos was given, nitna, as we'll see soon, to the Jewish people, and that is a remembrance of the Yidden being avodim, or the Eibishter taking us out of Mitzrayim. Alpisi is verstandig mit was is farmaten Teire mitzvah Shabbos given ausgeteilt von Shar mitzvah Teire. And now we can understand why Shabbos is different than all the other mitzvahs. In the beginning of the Sikh, we emphasized that Yosef was different than his brothers, and Shabbos was different than the mitzvahs. Why is Shabbos different than the other mitzvahs? Under the mitzvahs is there mitzias nischadish given on base matan Teira. Most mitzvahs, besides for Shabbos, became an entity, became a thing at matan Teira. Fardim zijn ze niet given begeder mitzias. Achevte bifnei atzmei, achevte shal mitzvah. Before matan Teira, they were not a thing. They were not something that had that were a physical or a tangible entity. Before Matan Teira, the only part of the mitzvah was the action of the person. But that action did not affect the physical or tangible object of the mitzvah. Masha'enkin Shabbos. Was der Zman von Yom HaShabbos is Yom HaShvi is ausgeteilt mitzad der Bria, der Vayonach bei Yom HaShvi. But Shabbos, before Matan Torah, before anything happens, the time, the physical time of Shabbos, the seventh day, is already different. Kumt us as die Chefze von Yom HaShabbos is schon gewähnt euch keine Matan Torah. Von sin Sheishes Mebreishes. A regular mitzvah, the mitzvah of tefillin, for example, Yankee Avinu could put on tefillin, could do the mitzvah of tefillin, I should say. But it didn't affect the chefza. The physical object is not affected. We'll see soon, the Rabbi will explain even more in the next if. But when it came to Shabbos, besides the fact that the Avos could keep Shabbos, the day of Shabbos was inherently holy. From the very first Shabbos of creation, the chefza of Shabbos, in this case the chefza of Shabbos is the time from nightfall on Friday till nightfall on Shabbos, that was already holy. No, es ist noch nicht given der Zivui zum Gavre Eden. What was lacking, in that case, who needs Matan Torah for the guys of Shabbos? What was lacking was the commandment to the Yid. What was lacking was that the mitzvah part should be a chefza. The mitzvah should have a physical tangibility in this world. So just to clarify, all other mitzvahs before Matan Torah, it was only the gavra, and after Matan Torah, it's also the chefza. In Shabbos, it's divided. The etzem of Shabbos, the chefza of Shabbos, existed even before Matan Torah. The mitzvah of Shabbos was only gavra and not chefza. But in Shabbos, there is a chefza, there is a physical tangibility of time that exists as a holy, let's call it object. It's not really an object, it's more a time frame that exists even before Matan Torah. Parenthetically speaking, Al Pisa Yumtik was the Shabbos hat nit kein Sheichas zu benen Neach mit Agland von the Yom V'Layla is based. So this makes it geschmack. The fact that the origin, the source of the fact that a Ben Noach is not supposed to observe Shabbos is learned from a pasuk by Noach way before Matan Torah. Because Shabbos already exists as a chavtza, even as a chavtza. The Shabbos already became a holy thing, and therefore you can discuss whether it's applicable to the Ben Noach or not. So, which this just proves this fact that Shabbos already existed, and you could talk about it. So the difference between Shabbos and other mitzvahs is that when it comes to the mitzvah of Shabbos, when it comes to Shabbos, I should say, there is even a chavtza, a gashmistic chefza that is holy before Matan Torah. So that begins to explain to us why we're talking about mitzvah of Shabbos as it's different than the other mitzvahs, because Shabbos was already holy even before Matan Torah. Und das ist der Pirush, was man sagt bei Shabbos, dem Lashon Kedem shalei nitna sein, ad shalei nitna. And that's how we can use this expression, Shabbos wasn't given yet. Oich far dem tzivoy of Shmira Shabbos, is Shabbos gonna metzias. Even before Hashem commanded us at Mora or at Matan Torah to observe Shabbos, Shabbos is already a thing. It's already has the same definitions as it will have later after Hashem gives it as a mitzvah. The fact that what defines it, the fact that we refrain from malacha. Nor, damost, is he given in another hecher neshus. Before Matan Torah, Shabbos was in a different domain. It existed as a real thing, a day that we can't do malacha, but it belonged to the giver. It belonged to Hashem. Shabbos is given as Mama Yuchad if I was that Eibishter Hatem Tag. Kiva Yachol Shevis Gem Malachte. It was holy because Hashem rested on that day. Nesinas Shabbos at Ufketon. And then when the Eibishter gave Shabbos to us, what was accomplished that it should be transferred into the domain of the recipient of us. That even a Yid can also observe Shabbos and have an impact on the physical day of Shabbos. This is given as sin as a Shabbos from them before Hashem gave us Shabbos. It didn't have any application to anyone else. The only people who were really the only one who was affected by that was Hashem. He owned it. It was his, and it couldn't affect anyone else. The Rebbe now explains this in other words. The whole idea that a physical person, can take a physical object and make it holy is something that comes Mikeach Hashem. Hashem empowers us, for after Matan Torah usually, to take a hide of an animal and make it into tefillin and make the gashmi, make the physical object into something that's holy. But on his own, the nivra, the creation, doesn't have the power to do so. So therefore, when it comes to Shabbos, even if one was to observe Shabbos, they wouldn't have the ability to observe it the way it's observed in the domain of Hashem, meaning to say that the day itself is holy. And therefore there's no point to observe Shabbos. in this regard, with regards to the fact that he wants to change the day of Shabbos, wants to impact it, sanctify it, he can't do that. He doesn't have the ability to cross over between the physicality of the day and the holiness of the day. When Hashem gave it to us at Matan Torah, He affected since by Matan Torah the barrier between heaven and earth was removed. Shabbos is and Shabbos, similar to Milah, which became, as explained in other sichos, that Milah was a commandment from Hashem, and therefore it was able to become something holy before Matan Torah. Shabbos also is tzivcha b'mara, ongizak gevaran der gavra. The Eibishter commanded the human being with the mitzvah of Shabbos. The Eibishter hat gegeben zu Eden auf dem Zman von Yom HaShvi die Chefze von Shabbos, azoi adozol zayin a Chefze the mitzvah b'hem, peil zayin in an Eden dolamata. So by Shabbos, when the Eibishter gave us the mitzvah of Shabbos, the Eibishter gave us the ability that the observance of Shabbos should make the day holy and it should make the person holy. In other words, until Hashem gave it to us, Shabbos was inherently holy, but the person couldn't do anything about it. The person couldn't intensify or increase the holiness of Shabbos because Shabbos belonged to the Eibishter. And then it says, Achelek nitna, keinish nitna, before Yosef, before Matan Torah, for example, in the time of Yosef, Shabbos had not yet been given to the human being. So the human being had no purpose in keeping Shabbos because there was no value, there was no benefit in the keeping of Shabbos because the sanctity of Shabbos was not affected or changed by the person's observance. And that's what it was saying, that it was Kait Mishlei Nitna. It wasn't given yet. It wasn't yet handed over into the possession of the human being, so that way he can actually sanctify the day of Shabbos. So now we can understand. Now they understand the deficiency of that time because it was before Matan Torah, because it was Achelek Nitna. Therefore, generally speaking, Shabbos doesn't affect. The observance of Shabbos doesn't affect the Shabbos, doesn't affect the Chefz of the Gashmiyas. But now, this will help us understand why Yosef's Shmir Shabbos is different and greater. Das, was die Avis und Shvatim haben kein mitzvahs Eides ist an Nistave geworden. The fact that the Avis and the Shvatim fulfilled the mitzvah of Shabbat, mitzvahs in general, before they were commanded to do so, das given wie viel Pulas haben genuftan. It only reached, the impact only reached as far as a human being can reach. Kann aber nicht Meshana sein, die Metzias vertellen von der Chefze, wie sie ist beschaffen geworden, but the human being cannot change the actual physical object as it was created. Nicht a Chefze, Matze, wie kajetze beze, uiskitel durch sehr Pole von anderen Chafetze, Mitzvah, shekamei a Chefze de Mitzvah. You can't identify, you can't change the object, even though you're using it for a mitzvah, eating matzah. This matzah that you did a mitzvah on is not going to look any different than the other matzah. It's not going to be any different than the other matzah, because before Matan Torah there was no way to change the matzah, even if you did a mitzvah with it. Similarly, any other mitzvah that you need a physical object for. Similarly, with regards to resting on Shabbos by the brothers of Yosef, it was only the action of the human being, of the person, that they did something, so it affected them. But they could not impact the object, the thing of Shabbos, meaning the time of Shabbos. Their shvisim and malacha is given blaze a simon of kivei Shabbos. The fact that they refrained from doing malacha symbolized the fact that Hashem rests on Shabbos, but it didn't change anything in the physical time of Shabbos. Mashen came by Yosef, Zayin Shmir Shabbos is Mefurish B'Torah, whereas by Yosef, whose observance of Shabbos is written explicitly in the Torah, it does affect the world. It does become something in the world. And on the contrary, it's something that is eternal, which this is the chiddush, the massive chiddush of Yosef's Shmir Shabbos, that despite the fact that Matan Torah had not yet happened yet, and therefore the bridge between heaven and earth had not yet been opened, And therefore, when the Avos and the Shvatim observed Shabbos or did any other mitzvah, it could only go as far as the Gavra could reach, but it could not affect the Chefza, it could not affect the physical. Yosef observing Shabbos in Mitzrayim, that was different. There was able to be a bridge between heaven and earth, and which is why it's actually written into the Torah. Why Taka? If Matan Torah wasn't given yet, how is it possible for Yosef to bridge this gap? Says Yadua Dimayla from Yosef the Gabishar Shvatim is well known. Chassidus explains the advantage, the difference of Yosef over the other brothers. The Shvatim are given reit saying, but das is an Eifen Aveda, was as Gedem is Beis Beidadus. The brothers were shepherds. Which shepherding is something that causes isolation. When and being aloof from worldly matters. Their father is there, Shabbos, therefore everything that they do, including the Shabbos observances, in a way that it is removed from the world, it doesn't affect the world. The fact that they rested on that day did not affect the actual day of Shabbos, the time, Zman. Mashenkin, the Aveda von Yosef is given in Mitzrayim, whereas Yosef was operating in Mitzrayim, Erbas Aretz, in the most immoral place in the world. And not only did Mitzrayim not distract him from serving Hashem, the Zaynik Mitzrayim is a given der Moshel v'Shalat of Mitzrayim, and the contrary, Yosef is the ruler of Mitzrayim. Nobody can move a limb without Yosef. Not only is Yosef ruling the material part of Mitzrayim, he was providing them with sustenance, but also he was affecting their spiritual lives. Yosef accomplished that they should circumcise themselves, which is certainly a step in the road to self-refinement. So Yosef, unlike his brothers, is operating in the physical world, and Yosef is ruling the physical world. And because he was down here in this world in Mitzrayim, and in Mitzrayim itself, when he was still in the home of his Egyptian master, meaning Potiphar, even before he was granted by Paroi that he should become the viceroy of Mitzrayim, Yosef, the Eibishter was with him. So Yosef goes down to Mitzrayim, and rather than remove himself from the world, he engages in worldly matters, but he does so in a way that Hashem is with him. So in Yosef's life, he can experience the fact that the Eibishter rests on Shabbos. Shabbos as a thing, not just as something that the Eibishter rested, but something that is brought, that is affected in the physical world. And therefore Yosef's Shabbos observance, even before it was given in it contained something, a similarity to the Shabbos of after Matan Torah, that it was able to affect the Chefza of Shabbos. It was able to affect the physical time of Shabbos. So this is the answer to the question, what is so unique about Yosef's Shmira Shabbos? It's understood now very clearly. Number one, we have to understand the Shabbos already existed. So unlike other mitzvahs, the Chefza of Shabbos already exists. What happens in Matan Torah is that Chefza is then given to the Jewish people. But before Matan Torah, Shabbos exists. It's just that a regular human being can't tap into it because it's Kodim Shleiti Nasan. It wasn't given to them yet. But Yosef had access to it. And therefore, Yosef's Shmira Shabbos is written in the Torah. And Yosef's Shmira Shabbos is different and unique and higher than that of his brothers, because Yosef's Shmira Shabbos affects the Zman, the Chefza of Shabbos. And that answers the question why we focused on Yosef's Shmira Shabbos, because Yosef and the Shmira Shabbos, those two things, different than other mitzvahs and different than the brothers, is unique in its own way, and therefore it gets mentioned in Torah explicitly. Now we have to go back to the second question. V'hachin. Where do we see this in the fact that Yosef said, Utveach tebach v'hachin? This will also explain to us that why the Torah reveals this to us through the word v'hachin. Which represents the fact that he was preparing for Shabbos. The fact that someone refrains from malacha on Shabbos really only shows the change in the person. The person on this day is resting, is refraining from doing malacha. But by not doing something, it doesn't affect what he's not doing. The fact that he's not plowing the field doesn't affect the field. It only affects him, that he is resting on Shabbos. But when he works, when he does an act, physical act, that's preparing from Erev Shabbos to Shabbos, this impacts the objects of the world, if he's cooking, the food that he's cooking. And it affects the time, he's doing it from before Shabbos to Shabbos. As mitzad der Anderskeit von Shabbos is men sich zu ihm meichen noch von früher Peilen Welt. That it's because of the uniqueness of Shabbos that you're preparing for Shabbos, and it has an impact on the world. So in a sense, the hachana, the preparation for Shabbos, has a greater impact on the world than the not doing malacha on Shabbos. Let's take this a step further. The preparations that he's making on Erev Shabbos have an effect and an impact on the day of Shabbos as well. We just read as we see this in halacha. From the pasuk that says on the sixth day you should prepare, let it men up. What we learn from that pasuk, nit azoi, nit nor as bedarf mechin zayin if Shabbos bipuula bakin und kachem b'yem, is not just that you have to actually do something to prepare for Shabbos ve'echinu. There steht beferish in pasuk, because that already said earlier in the pasuk. Eis asher toifu eifu, veis asher tivashelu bashelu. That which needs to be cooked, you should cook. That needs to be baked, you should bake. So the fact that I have to cook and bake before Shabbos is not what I'm learning from the pasuk ve'echinu. Nor from them zetmin, but from the pasuk of ve'echinu we learn as achsvei rachmana lisudas Shabbos, that the Torah considers Suda Shabbos as something important. She has binena b'fiv b'yom b'chol, that even before Shabbos, even on the weekday, a person should say, L'kavod Shabbos Kodesh. This is being done for Shabbos. Not only is the fact that I'm working with physical things, physical food, for example, to prepare for Shabbos, do I see how I'm elevating the world? But in addition to that, when I'm preparing for Shabbos, it affects that my Sudas Shabbos should actually be something of importance, different than a meal during the rest of the week. So it has an effect on the Shabbos itself that it's becoming holy. The Rebbe is the Torah Meram is a meaning for Shmini Shabbos the Yosef in Moshe Nachana, and this is why the Torah alludes to this idea of Yosef Shabbos observance with the word Hachana. Well, the Yisrin Umayla for Zayin Shmini Shabbos, because the advantage, the uniqueness of Yosef's Shabbos is bashtanen in them was durch ihm und in him is the Tag Gewana Yom Yuchad. That because of Yosef, the day, not just the person, the day itself became a special day. There was also the thing, the object of resting on the seventh day, which is expressed specifically in the idea of preparation when you work with the physical world to prepare for Shabbos. So this answers the questions from the beginning of the Sikha. We asked, what is unique about Yosef Shmini Shabbos? The fact that it affected the physical world. Where do you see that in the words with Tvayach Tevach V'Hachein? Because the whole idea of Achana is to elevate the physical world, which is what is unique about Yosef over his brothers. We also asked, why does the Torah say it Ba'akifin? But what Yosef didn't do, Fakir, is not Ba'akifin. Dafka Hachana, it's not about refraining from work on Shabbos. Hachana is about elevating the world and elevating the physical objects of the world and carrying that over into Shabbos, that Shabbos should become special because of the fact that you prepared for it before Shabbos. In Sivchas, the Rebbe applies all of this to us in a practical level. Just like before Matan Torah, there are these two aspects of Shabbos. There's the fact that there's Hashem's Shabbos, which is inherently holy, and then there's the fact that there was the Gavra that can observe Shabbos, but it doesn't actually impact the Chefza of Shabbos. Also, after Matan Torah, you have two aspects in the observance of Shabbos. You have Shabbos as it was conveyed to us in a very clear way in Halacha. Shvisa b'Shabbos mi-malacha, that one should refrain from doing malacha on Shabbos. But there's a deeper level of shamer, shvisa mediburim gashmiyim, to refrain from materialistic talk. Nit blois nit marbe zayin bedibur, not only to not increase in words that have no value, nor beofen shel shvisa, shaloi lasuach shum sicha betelech chas v'shalom. The Alter Rebbe writes in Kuntves Achrein that a person should not speak words that have no value to them. Der Eifen HaShvisa nimmt sich davon, was bei Iden hält sich an, die Shvisa von dem Eibishten, nicht nur die Shvisa von Asiyah Shmayim v'Aretz Gashmiyim, nor K'mei Shabbos Hashem mi Yud Ma'amoresh nivru behem Shmayim v'Aretz. When a person goes to the deeper level of Shabbos observance, that not just he doesn't do what he's not allowed to do, but he doesn't conduct himself in a profane way. He doesn't speak the way he speaks during the days of the week. What he does is he's emulating Hashem, who also didn't speak the 10 utterances to create the world. So in the not speaking Dvarim B'Telem on Shabbos, you actually tap in to this Shmira Shabbos that the Eibishter did in the beginning of creation. By Yosefin is weil bei ihm hat sich angehört der Kivei Shabbos von Eibishten. Just like the perfection of Yosef's Shmira Shabbos was because he experienced the rest of Hashem. Similarly, with regards to the observance of Shabbos after Matan Torah, as their Shemer Shabbos Kiel Chassid, that he who observes Shabbos properly is Shabbos nit blaze ni meisim gashmim and deburim gashmim, is resting not just from materialistic speech or materialistic actions. But he realizes, he experiences the Eibishter's resting of Shabbos, bis to the Pnimiyas Shabbos, till he goes deeper into Shabbos, which is expressed in the proper intent and concentration in Shabbos davening, and the learning on Shabbos. The Dafka b'Hashem echad, Shabbos la'Hashem alekecha, to connect with Hashem, as it says that Shabbos is a day to connect to Hashem. Shabbos la'Hashem. So when a person not just rests from work, not just rests from speech, but actually elevates his Shabbos to daven and to learn to get closer to Hashem, but does bring miyad the gula mitzvah shlema the Mashiach tzidkenu, because this brings immediately the redemption, the gula through Mashiach. Chazal say ilmolei meshamrin yisrael shtei shabbos kiel chasan. The Chazal say if only the Yidden would observe 2 Shabbos properly, but das is b'meshach hazman von ein Shabbos. So the Rebbe explains over here that within one Shabbos, if you observe both levels of Shabbos, you're fulfilling the idea of fulfilling 2 Shabbos. And if when that happens, it's miyad negolim. Immediately comes the geula. So when we prepare properly for Shabbos, and we recognize that Shabbos is not just about not doing malacha, but Shabbos is about holiness, and then we live a life of holiness on Shabbos, where even our words and even the things we engage in are all about holiness, then we are fulfilling Shtei Shabbos in one, and we are zeicha to miyad negolim, the geula, immediately.